Hello, everyone. Today we are in chapter 12 of the Old Testament book of Judges. Now, throughout our study of Judges, there's been a pattern that is repeated over and over again, and you should know it well by now. The people of Israel do what is evil in God's sight. They end up taking on the religious practices of foreign nations and begin worshiping false gods. God gets upset about that and steps away from the people of Israel, who then find themselves inevitably being oppressed by those nations for whom they've adopted their beliefs. And then they eventually realize that they need to cry out to God. And when they do, God is merciful, and he raises from within the people of Israel a rescuer, a hero, a judge who unites the people of Israel, and they fight for their freedom and find peace until the judge dies. And then the people of Israel again fall into the habits of the foreign nations, and they do what is evil in God's sight, and the pattern repeats. There's been another pattern that's been forming, though, as we've been working our way through the book. And that is that the overall moral compass of the people of Israel has been steadily degrading. And things have been getting worse and worse and worse with each cycle of this pattern. And around chapter 6, when we met Gideon, we realized that now the judges themselves are flawed people. I kind of have the sense that the early judges were good. There was nothing bad to say about them. But then when we meet Gideon, although he does great things for God and he's a hero for the people of Israel overall, he is still a flawed man who ends up taking some, self-assertion is the right way to call it. He kind of gets into himself, and he starts taking liberties from his position, and ultimately he introduces a new form of idolatry to the people of Israel. Instead of worshiping false gods, they begin to worship him, and he's okay with it. We've continued on and seen the judges have more and more flaws, and now we are in the eighth judge, and his name happens to be Jephthah. We read about Jephthah yesterday, and Jephthah was also a deeply flawed guy. And one of the things that he did, we covered this yesterday, was he actually conflated some of the religious practices of foreign gods with the God of Israel. And he actually performed a child sacrifice. His own daughter, he sacrifices to God. God wanted nothing to do with that. There is no place for child sacrifice with the God of Israel, and yet he does that. As we pick up in chapter 12, we get to see kind of the end of Jephthah. And what happens with him seems to be a story that repeats from earlier. Gideon had a similar conflict with the people of Ephraim, and it goes like this. The people of Ephraim show up and say, hey, why did you not include us in the war that would result in the freedom of Israel? And in this case, Jephthah gives an explanation, and they respond like this at verse 4. The people of Ephraim responded, you men of Gilead are nothing more than fugitives from Ephraim and Manasseh. So Jephthah gathered all the men of Gilead and attacked the men of Ephraim and defeated them. So Gilead, the men of Gilead, led by Jephthah, end up going to war against the people of Ephraim. And as you read on, there's this interesting scene where they gain control of the River Jordan. And there's only one safe place, apparently, for people to cross the river. And so members of the tribe of Ephraim who are trying to flee this civil war are going there. And then, of course, they're met by Jephthah's armies. And they're asked, are you from Ephraim? And, of course, they're going to say no, because that's the only way for them to get through. But then they're hit with a trick question. They're asked to pronounce the word Shibboleth. Shibboleth is pronounced with an SH, but the people of Ephraim have an accent and they can't make the SH sound, so they end up saying Sibboleth. And when they do, they know that then they are from Ephraimites, and they kill them. It goes on to say that they killed 42,000 Ephraimites. Think about that for a minute. It would seem that Jephthah killed more Ephraimites than he did Amorites to free the people of Israel. And what's really important here is to know that the people of Ephraim are Israelites. This is Israelite on Israelite violence. And you will also notice in this chapter, there is not a single mention of God. This is about egos and pride and self-destruction. And I think the lesson for us is to be aware of the fact that our pride can blind us. And if we do not include God in our process, whatever that process is, we are going to end up in a terrible, terrible place. Now, the good news is that Jephthah is only a judge over Israel for a few more years. And when he dies, there comes a series of other minor judges that we see at the very end of this chapter, 3 more. And not much is said about them, except you will notice that it never says that Israel is in rest or peace under any of these judges. They're in a very tumultuous time as we find ourselves in the next chapter meeting our final judge of the book. But before we get there, the note to self here is that the theme throughout this book is that when we take our eyes off God, bad things happen. When we keep our eyes on God, good things happen. So let's take that and run with it today. As you move through your day, never forget the presence of God in every circumstance you find. Don't take initiative on your own without including God. When you do that on your own, you have no idea what you might be dealing with, and the consequences could be grave. But when you include God in your process, God will bless you and guide you. So go in peace and keep God in the center of every circumstance. Have a great day, everyone.
If these devotional videos are helpful to you, subscribe to our channel and click the notification button so you know when we post a new video. And of course, please share them with others.